Hello, everyone, and welcome. It'll take a bit for folks to filter in. So as you all are coming in, please feel free to state where you're coming from in the chat. We love to see it. I am currently in sunny Chapel Hill, North Carolina, enjoying the green. And I'm going to just give us a quick introduction to some of the things that are happening here at the archive while folks are filtering in. And thank you for the reminder to everybody, Stephen. If you are adding things to the chat, please make sure to change the menu to from host and panelists to everyone so that we can all see where you're coming from. So without any further ado on that end, I will let you all know some of the things that are going on at Letterform Archive. All right, so welcome to the Salon series. Again, if you're just coming in now, please let us know where you're coming from in the chat. At the end of the talk, we'll take questions on the Q&A. So if you have a question, you drop it into the chat. I actually cannot add it to the Q&A, so please try to make sure it goes into that Q&A button. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen, usually. It's in the middle, next to the chat button. Please note that the recording of this salon will be available fully to the public, to everyone, for 1 week after, or 10 days after the event on our website event page. So exactly where you found this to sign up, that's where you'll find the recording. And after that, it's going to be available to the Letterform Archive members only. And to find out more about that, please check out letterformarchive.org/join. So our next thing coming up is a very exciting in-person only talk by Joanna Drucker, Inventing the Alphabet, Origin Stories to Forensic Evidence. Like I said, this is in person and it is already sold out completely. But if you sign up for it online, and it's free, you will get a copy of the recording of the webinar. Well, not webinar, the in-person talk. I'm personally very much looking forward to that because I won't be able to be there. Next is a workshop. This is an online workshop with Angie Che called Putting Pencil to Pixel. It is to help you unlock the power of the iPad to create dynamic, polished, and punchy lettering. No previous Procreate or lettering experience is required. That's Thursdays, May 25th through June 15th. And then our ever popular Intro to Modern Type Design workshop, that'll be an online workshop with Farah Kazi or Kotzi. And in this class, you will learn how to create a typeface from sketch to screen and everything in between. In this 10-week online workshop, that's Mondays from June 5th to August 14th, each participant will gain an understanding of the methodologies and processes used to produce digital typefaces today. Then in June, we have another online lecture. This is a Letterform lecture, so totally free and open to the public. Hidden Diversity, Lessons from 4 Centuries of Javanese Script Heritage. This will be an online lecture with Aditya Bayu Perdana. Take a trip to Java, where 4 centuries of script, calligraphy, and typography leave a treasure trove of inspiration for designers. This is what we are, nope, that's from last week, sorry. And I am very excited to announce that we have our next exhibition opening. We're very sad to see Strike Through go, but we are very excited to usher in Subscription to Mischief, graffiti zines of the 1990s. This is featuring Greg LaMarche's archives and Letterform Archives collections of graffiti magazines. Subscription to Mischief opening on May 6th, 2023, that's this year, explores over, wow, I can't even say this number. Yes, I can. 40 1990s, 2 numbers, graffiti zines with a special focus on the making of Skills, Skills magazine. It highlights original works by prominent and lesser known writers of the area through pieces, throw-ups, and hand styles featured in letters, flick trade photos, and magazine submissions. It's going to be very interesting. And you can learn more about this and everything else we do at letterformarchive.org or just the events at letarc.org/events. Now, since we have most of you here today, by now, I just want to reiterate the welcome to the Salon series at Letterform Archive. Another reminder that we will be taking questions that go into the Q&A box. Please feel free to add those at any time. And I'll put in periodic reminders. And one more reminder that this recording will be available on our event page online for 10 days to the public. And then after that, only to members. So I'm now going to turn it over to Silas Monroe after I introduce him. Silas Monroe is a partner of Polymode, a studio that leads the edge of contemporary graphic design through poetic research, learning experiences, and making cool shit for clients in the cultural sphere, innovative businesses, and community-based organizations. Past collaborations include the City of LA's Mayor's Office, Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, Mark Bradford at the Venice Biennale, and Museum of Modern Art. Monroe's writing appears in the book W.E.B. Du Bois's Data Portraits, Visualizing Black America, published by Princeton Architectural Press, and he is also the curator and author of Strike Through Typographic Messages of Protest, which is coming down this week. So if you're in the Bay and you haven't seen it, go now. Monroe is particularly interested in the often unaddressed post-colonial relationship between design and marginalized communities. They hold a MFA from CalArts and a BFA from RISD. Monroe is founding faculty and chair emeritus at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And without any further ado, welcome, Silas.
Thanks, Sarah, for that introduction. I'm so honored to be hosting this panel. I'm really moved because Strike Through as an exhibition has been such a powerful experience. And I've been lucky enough this week to actually walk through the exhibition again with Stephen Coles, my co-curator of the exhibition, who's here with us from Letterform Archive. And we gave a couple of tours to some CCA students that I'm working with. And it was just a really powerful experience to see how much knowledge and exploration is in the exhibition. But I'm also very excited about this panel because we are bringing equally formidable voices in design history who could curate their own shows and also have made collections of research. And I'm really excited for this dialogue where we're going to be talking about this idea of call and response. So histories of designing protest. And Stuf and I and all of the other collaborators at Polymode and Letterform Archive, when we were conceiving this show, we're really thinking about this idea of solidarity across different protest movements and the idea that in the traditions of various musical strains, call and response operates in a way that you often hear in a protest too, where you hear someone chanting and then others in the protest chanting back. And so this idea of Ana Llorente's research and Jose Mendez's research adding to this discourse, I'm really excited about. And so we're actually going to start with Ana Llorente, who is a Cuban Venezuelan designer and educator living and working in Ucay, California, the land of the Pomo people. She has over 20 years of combined experience in graphic design, experiential design, and education. She's an amazing educator, also teaching graduate and undergraduate courses at California College of the Arts, as well as Otis College Art and Design. Anna and I have taught together and overlapped. She's amazing in the classroom, but also has a vibrant studio practice that focuses on collaborative experiences, integrated learning, and audience engagement, publication design, and visual experiments. And today she is going to be talking about protest graphics in Cuba. And I turn it over to Ana.
Thank you, Silas. Okay, once I turn on my presentation, I won't be able to see anyone. So, okay, so here we go. Well, actually, I can't see the panelist. Great. Okay, hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you to Silas, to Sir, to Stephen, to Jose, to the Letter from Archive, and to everybody here that has joined us today. Thank you so much to you for joining us. It's an honor to be here. Silas did an introduction already, but I am doing one too, so I'll just try to go through it very briefly. My name is Ana Llorente. I currently live and my studio practice is in Ukiah, California, the land of the Pomo people, Northern Pomo. And I teach at both California College of the Arts and Otis College of Art and Design. I'm a faculty in both the MFA programs in these two schools. And I have a design practice that usually I work under the moniker of $1 a minute. And in this summer, hopefully, I'm hoping to launch a small run publication that I'm calling Allo Press. So I have a multi-layer lineage. My ancestors are from Spain. They're Spanish. They were tradespeople, educators, and colonizers, unfortunately, but gotta admit that part of my heritage. My ancestors are also Cuban. They were activists, farmers, educators, and as well as emigres. I was born in Venezuela, as Silas talked about. This is where my family emigrated from. They emigrated to Venezuela from Cuba in the mid-1960s. I have been a designer and an educator for many, many years. In the last few years, my practice has mostly focused on education, research, and the research tends to be exclusively on Cuba and Cuban graphic design. I've gotten involved in activism, primarily focused on academia here at CCA, as well as graphic design. So today I'm going to share some of the research that it actually began with my thesis project at CalArts and has continued on and off through the years on Cuba and Cuban graphic design. So starting in 2018, when Miguel Díaz-Canel became the third secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, conditions for Cuban artists began to drastically shift. A series of laws were passed and signed by this new president, and they're usually called decrees. And one of them is called Decree 349, and this one was the first one that the new president signed. The basic premise of this decree is that all persons engaging in any type of artistic practice, including art collectives, musicians, writers, fine artists, and many others, are forbidden from engaging both in public and or private spaces in any type of artistic activity without the prior approval of the Minister of Culture. This decree continues to outlaw the use of patriotic symbols, the use of vulgar or obscene language, and all other content that infringes on the everyday development of Cuban society as it relates to culture. So Decree 349 also criminalizes the publishing of books that may contain content that is considered harmful towards Cuba's ethical and cultural values. The decree is very vague and open to multitude of interpretations. So the signing and the passing of this decree led to an unprecedented response from the artistic community in Cuba, one that hasn't been seen on the island in many, many decades. So in the same year, 2018, the decree was passed, the group Movimiento San Isidro was formed. It's a group of Cuban artists, journalists, and academics. They came together to protest this increased censorship on artistic expression. They begin to organize. They gather support from fellow artists, as well as generated work that challenged the decree. In December 2020, Movimiento San Isidro organized a peaceful sit-in protest that took place in front of the Ministry of Culture in Havana, Cuba. Their only demand was for the Cuban government to engage with them in an open dialogue regarding the censorship. The protest in some ways was successful because the government paused the decree. But despite of this pausing of the decree, censorship continued, and it happened via repression of critical voices, through house arrest, through harassment, torture, and imprisonment of many Cuban artists. Cuban artist Hamlet Labastida was one of the artists that was arrested and imprisoned in early 2021 in relationship to challenging this decree. The impetus for his arrest was a proposal sent via the app called Telegram, and it was sent to a group of artists. And this is on the bottom left, you see a screenshot of the actual message that was sent. So he called for an action, and the action called for stamping Cuban currency with acronyms. One of them was MSI, which is Movimiento San Isidro, and the other one was 27N, which is the date the sitting and the Minister of Culture happened, 27th of November, 2020. The way that that Hamlet describes it is as follows, and this is a translation from the actual message. This action could be done at home without risk, maybe by someone with no visibility to the DSE, which is the state security in Cuba. The currency would circulate and be on everyone's hands. So he was arrested. He was in a residency in Germany, and when he returned to Havana in January 2021, he was arrested because of this message that he sent to fellow artists. And what had happened is his imprisonment instigated protests across Europe and beyond. So the note that you see right above is a Cuban $50 or 50 pesos note. It's part of a performance that was done at the Contemporary Art Fair in Madrid, where fairgoers made his proposal a reality. And then this is a couple of images from one of his projects called, Hamlet's project called Cultura Profiláctica. And it's a series of cut paper compositions that utilize symbols and iconography from Cuban iconography. So it directly challenges Decree 349. Another artist that it's still to this day remains in prison, serving a 5-year sentence, is Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara. And this is a poster on the left by Cuban designer Eric Silva, and it shows Otero Alcántara wearing a mask that reads, "Live, Cuba, live." On the right-hand side, we see activist Luis Robles. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for peacefully protesting and demanding an end to the repression, as well as freedom for a Cuban rapper named Denis Solis. And his placard reads, "Freedom, no more repression, free Denis." So what is extraordinary about all this is that the protests that challenged Decree 349 were instigated internally in Cuba. Additionally, this protest generated the energy for additional protests that happened later in the year. In July 11, 2021, island-wide protests erupted to demand an end to food and medicine shortages, and as well as accountability for the government's lax response to the COVID-19 pandemic. A generation of young Cuban artists that were born and raised in Cuba, that had endured relentless hardships because they love their country. But what happens is that their artistic voice is now being taken, and they have had enough. So this created a culture shift ensued, and something that it's unthinkable happened, which is protest being instigated, planned, and executed within Cuba. So this headline from a Vox article from 2021, from July 15, 2021, solidifies the sentiment with the title, "Artist Laid the Foundation for Cuba's Protest." In this article, Professor Michael Bustamante describes the unprecedented protest as a cathartic expression of frustration. And the author, her name is Jen Kirby, states that the sum of the protest, the work of the San Isidro movement, which, by the way, was founded by Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, and the ease on internet restrictions, which facilitated social media access, which is something that didn't really exist extensively before, helped spread not just the art, but also that political message of Patria y Vida. So Patria y Vida is the title of a song by a group called Gente Zona. It translates to homeland and life. It's a motto that is inspired by a 1960s speech that was given by Fidel Castro, that was Patria o Muerte, which translates to homeland or death. So today in Patria o Muerte country, with rampant human rights violations and people-to-people espionage, a place where dissemination of information on social media, personal blogs, and independent media outlets are outlawed, where freedom of expression rights are openly violated, artists have had enough. Before the recent events that I just shared with you, protest against governmental repression in Cuba had mostly manifested from the outside. Through more than 60 years of repression, this dissent from the outside has shaped itself in myriads of ways. So I wanted to share a couple of historic ways of protest that have happened in the past that I've sort of named cautionary tales and protests from abroad. First, I'm going to go over cautionary tales, and it's a group called Truth About Cuba Committee. And the Truth About Cuba Committee was formed in 1961, and short for it is TAC, and it ended in 1975, founded by a group of Cuban exiles, Luis Manrara, Jorge Bosch, James Baker, and Thomas Wolfe. And their mission was to disseminate information in the political and economic realities of Cuba after the Castro Revolution. They wanted to warn the US of the threat communism in Cuba posed. They have many chapters throughout the world. They published and distributed a large number of bilingual publications that were available free to members, to the public, libraries, governmental offices and agencies, and the media in the US and abroad. So I'm going to share a few, here we go. A few of the works that they put together. This is a, I need to find my notes, hold on one second. This is a cautionary tale of nuclear arsenals that are only 90 miles away. It's a pamphlet. This group, TAC, created most of their work focused on education. It was very intellectually complex, very history and research based. Their pamphlets with lots and lots of information. They would do lots of different lectures. This is another one. Oops, sorry. A booklet, Communist Methodology of Conquest. It's about an expose on communist methodologies. And the one on the right-hand side is sort of a self-reflection and accountability pamphlets on their accomplishments. And a lot of these pieces were designed by the founders and sometimes by others. They were very demanding. They were steadfast. Their work was very expansive and complex. It caters to the intellect. These are some anti-socialist propaganda, which came as double-sided cards, as well as propaganda discouraging foreign relations with communist countries. And lastly, a plea to Americans not to be like Cuba, using the metaphor of the Titanic sinking in this beautiful typographic rendition of a ship sinking, the letters Titanic. And then the second group that I wanted to share with you, it's a group, oh wait, that's one more, sorry. This is a pamphlet that contains their whole body of work, all of their pamphlets. So it's an index of all the publications they have put together, and this beautiful #1 made out of like a monument that says 1 million or more distributed. So the next group I wanted to share with you is Fighting Oppression from Abroad. It was a student association that was called Abdallah, Agrupación Estudiantil Abdallah, and they operated from 1968 until 1982. And they were an anti-communist activist group that was primarily made of or formed by Cuban-born students. It was founded in the US, and it had chapters at several colleges and universities around the country. They hosted congresses and marches and other events to promote anti-Castro agenda, also to fight communism, and they also fought to gain release for Cuban political prisoners. So I find that it's a really interesting contrast with the other group. Their work is informational, direct and bold, emotional and expressive, actionable, sort of caters to the heart. This is a couple of posters from celebrating the birth of Jose Marti, who is a patriot and a Cuban patriot, a very important figure in Cuba, and is a celebration of his birth. On the left-hand side, in the small type at the bottom, it says, "The future will be ours," and on the one on the right, the vertical type reads, "The fight will continue." A couple of posters announcing their congresses, their gatherings, very energetic typographically. The one on the left, 1973, and on the right, the one on the right, I don't know the year, but the one on the left is designed by Luis Fernandez Puente. And he is one of the individuals, his name comes up quite often as being one of the designers for the Abdallah work. These are for the third Congress, the one on the left. The word Abdallah is seen sort of in the center of the silhouette, in the shape of the island of Cuba. And then the one on the right, from the Congress in 1976, it's the silhouette of the island of Cuba, kind of creating this sort of sunset going upwards. A couple of more. One on the left is for a Congress, for the 7th Congress, and it uses a statue of Jose Marti in a silhouette, sort of it's sort of like a nod to the silk screening and to the poster making that happens and continues to happen in Cuba now. And the one on the right, it reads, "To Cuba with gun in hand." It's more of an expressive, handmade poster to incite change. The one on the left here, again by Luis Fernandez Puente, is discussing or showing information on a massacre that happened in Boniato in Cuba in 1975. And the one on the right reads, "Cuba, 28,000 shot, enough is enough." So a protest to a massacre that had happened. And then lastly, this is one of the last ones from a Congress in 1980. They folded in 1980 1883, an invitation to their Congress, the 10th Congress. And that's it. Thank you so much. If you're interested in learning more and knowing more, I did a lecture in the BIPOC Design History course called Independence and Incomplete Survey of Graphic Design. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Anna. That was so moving and so inspiring, and a lot to digest. If you all have questions, there's a Q&A function that people can put in the chat. We're going to hold and do a combined Q&A after both presentations, but if anything moved you, it can also be a comment. Feel free to drop that in the Q&A space. Okay. We are now going to transition to our second speaker, Jose Menendez, who I'm also very excited about. And Anna, thank you for mentioning BIPOC Design History. Jose also spoke in that series that was co-facilitated with Ramon Tejada about a series of Latinx perspectives in graphic design. And that presentation was so explosive by Jose as well. And just really looking forward to him sharing his research and experience. Jose is a graphic designer and educator with a background in marine science, communication, and landscape architecture. His multidisciplinary practice, research, and teaching are intertwined as he investigates topics such as community engagement through health communication and social justice, expanding the canons of graphic design by highlighting Latin American and Caribbean practices, and designing spatial justice and ecological narratives in the landscape. Jose's work examines the design practice as a platform for multilingual communication, dissemination, access, visibility, equity, and justice at multiple scales. Jose is an assistant professor at the Northeastern University College of Art, Media, and Design, and a founding partner at Buena Grafica Social Studio in Providence, Rhode Island. Please welcome Jose.
Thank you so much, Silas, and for that intro. And, you know, I have to say, Anna, this is so cool because we're talking about the Caribbean, and today is the first day in Providence, Rhode Island, that is 89 degrees. So, you know what I mean? I feel it. It's here. It's with us. And, you know, el fuego y la candela, you know, it's with us. So just wanted to call out for the weather here because it's a fun one. So welcome to, hello everyone, my name is Jose Menendez. I'm excited to be here with you all, sharing part of my research. Can you all hear me, right? We're all good? Yeah, okay, good. Along my colleague and new friend, I think, Ana Llorente, because we had so much fun yesterday talking about this, kind of putting together these ideas on the Caribbean. Caribbean graphic carteles or posters, what they translate to, and I have been collecting and studying as part of my ongoing research at Northeastern University, where I teach. I grew up in Puerto Rico and I moved to the States in the early 2000s to study, and I have always been fascinated by the visual arts and graphics in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it is hard to talk about the development of the protest carteles in Puerto Rico without acknowledging the influence of the United States, since the island became its territory in 1898. As a result of the end of the Spanish-American War, where we stopped being a Spanish colony to become a colony of the United States. So, and in this talk, I'm going to talk through specific events that have inspired the development of protest carteles that have also helped develop a characteristic cultural graphic language in the island. I will start with historic events, moving to protesting the everyday, if I like to call that, and wrapping up with some contemporary protest posters or events that are happening right now in the island. I like starting with the historic events so that I can provide some context about the history of the island and its confusing political situation, which has inspired the resistance and thus the graphic culture that represents it. And it's really, you know, to talk about the Puerto Rican revolutionary carteles, we can't do that without mentioning El Grito de Lares, or the Lares Uprising, an unsuccessful uprising that was the first major revolt of Puerto Rican against Spanish rule in the island in around 1868. And it took place in the town of Lares, which is named, it's a mountain area, mountainous area in the center, south center of the area. And the commemoration of the event has been a subject of hundreds of posters, mainly since the creation of the national holiday in 1969. This cartel particularly celebrates the 102nd anniversary of the Lares Rebellion by Lorenzo Omar, one of the prolific designers in Puerto Rico. And you can see the influence in this mainly typographic cartel. Know how the type becomes the image and carries the flag of Lares, which is bold, stencil form. Omar hyphens the word grito, a move rarely seen in Puerto Rican carteles. The center composition follows the cross of Lares flag, and the stencil type is contrasted by Omar's characteristic calligraphy at the top and bottom of the cartel. Without the typography, in this case, there's no cartel. And an interesting fact about this flag is the resemblance to the Dominican Republic, a flag which Betances placed tribute when designing the Grito de Lares flag, and also the layout of the Puerto Rican flag that looks like the Cuban flag, and they have inverted colors. So interesting to think how the design of the symbols are interconnected within the Caribbean Antilles history. On another note, this cartel was commissioned by the Taller of Graphic Arts, or the Graphic Arts Workshop at the DIVETCO, the Division of Community of Education, which could read as a commemorative poster within an institutional framework. So that's kind of an interesting way that kind of the protest there was kind of happening through that. This cartel by Antonio Martorell also celebrates the figure of Ramon Betances, who planned the Grito de Lares. Made in 1970, it contrasts with the previous cartel, as it relies heavily in illustration rather than type. The portrait of Betances and in his cautionary look dominates the piece, which is also covered by the Lares flag. The graphic in this case is much more revolutionary. It's looking at you. It's really having a one-to-one relationship with you. And then the intricate illustration of Betances' beard dissolves into an urban landscape on the fire at the bottom, where American corporations such as the Caribbean Hilton and Howard Johnson's hotels appearing to burn, which speaks about how the Lares revolt, it's still alive in this time against the United States. This earlier poster by Martorell also about the Grito de Lares is very illustrative, intricate, and uses colors to emphasize the two gritos, or screams in this case, from Betances, screaming not just against the Spanish colonization, but also against the United States one. Martorell uses calligraphic letter forms that hide within Betances' beard to title the cartel, and positions his signature and date, and the alacran mark, which is the scorpion, which is a common mark used by all the artists and designers of this studio, which is called the alacran, or the scorpion studio. And the bold sans serif and hand-cut lettering reads two quotes by Betances: "I don't want a colony with Spain nor with the United States. What are Puerto Ricans doing that they don't rebel?" With his name and his hand-drawn slab service, perhaps emulating some sort of Wild Wild West wood type there that keeps me kind of thinking about what was going on there when Martorell was doing this. The Jayuya cartel, also by Martorell, is divided in three zones that narrate three events in the life of Pedro Albizu Campos, a lawyer who was the first Puerto Rican graduate from Harvard and law school, and became the president of the Nationalist Party. The cartel illustrates two uprisings, one in Jayuya, Mastermind, by Blanca Canales, who's an incredible revolutionary lady, in 1950s, another, and the other one in the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. in 1954. Also a member, Lolita Lebron, was a very important presence, a female presence on the revolution. Albizu was the mastermind of these two events, though, and or it was kind of behind all the stuff. And lastly, Martorell depicts Albizu in jail as a consequence for these events. In Pedro's arms, on the bottom area of the cartel, you can illustrate the illustration of the Jayuya uprising, a revolt that involved the deployment of an AP-47 Thunderbolt, the aircraft employed by the government to bomb the town of Jayuya at the time of the revolt. In the middle of the cartel, Martorell illustrates on Albizu's arm the time where a group of Puerto Rican nationalists carried out an armed attack on the United States Capitol in 1954. It's called the shooting on the U.S. House of Representatives, which resulted in the wounding of 5 members of the United States Congress. The top left then shows Albizu behind bars. Martorell uses in this poster 2 colors plus the white background on the paper and create a dynamic repetition of forms by alternating colors in each stamp. The typography stencil, sans, all caps, remind us of the militant narrative during these times. And what is extraordinary about this poster is that within its complexity, it offers different levels of reading from the 1 minute through 3 minute to the 5 minute viewer. So you are kind of having this kind of a very dimensional experience with this cartel. And another event that provoked local artists and activists in the island was the presence of the U.S. Navy in the beautiful island of Culebra. In the years that followed World War II, in Fuera la Manera Yankee de Culebra, Martorell represents the 6-decade conflict between the U.S. Navy and Puerto Ricans. Culebra is a beautiful Puerto Rican island located around 20 miles away from the mainland, from San Juan. And the Navy began military exercises in Culebra in 1941. The cartel portrays a scaled-up woman with 2 children fighting for their island, confronting the Navy while bombarded by their boats. The use of the woman figure can be related. You can think of a Russian realism poster created by, the Soviet Union in this kind of like very, imponent, posture. The lettering is cut out in bold strokes to maximize the sense of urgency. And this poster is a good example of how the rainbow gradient is used as a second color pass to minimize printing and resources. In these times, to further cut costs and maximize time, Martorell used the alternate use of color paper in case of, from black to white. There was no money, there was no budget, so they have to do what they had, and use the resources they got. This cartel by Jorge David Vázquez Penon, made in 1970s, also denunciates this conflict by using the gradient background similar to the previous poster. In this case, the character is much more simpler in its form, but it still holds a lot of symbolism. The marine and its hat represent the military presence, and the skull speaks to the environmental threat that the military and the drills imply in the territory. The cursive lettering then merges with the character, giving the cartel a strong type and image relationship. So culebra, so it's kind of like the little eyes of the skull. And what the previous cartels did was conveying the message of protest through the use of symbols. Now this cartel speaks to the conflict in a much more specific way by portraying one of the activists involving the protests, Rubén Berríos. And the name of the cartel is Violar la ley del imperio es cumplir la ley de la patria. Violating the empire's law is complying with the motherland's law. And this cartel denounces the fact that Rubén Berríos and 12 other protesters were arrested and incarcerated for 3 months after occupying Playa Flamenco Beach in Culebra to protesting in behalf of the liberation of the island. In terms of the graphic, this cartel has a very strong type and image relationship as the typography frames and encloses Rubén Berríos' portrait. And this is another cartel that denounces the liberation of political prisoners in Puerto Rico by Nelson Sambolin. This dynamic composition acts as a call to join the marches for the liberation of political Puerto Rican prisoners, while highlighting the light blue of the Puerto Rican flag, which from 1948 to 1957 was outlawed to be flown in public under the risk of being imprisoned for up to 10 years. For this reason, it became a stronger nationalist symbol in Puerto Rican communities, both in the island and the United States. And also the island was inhabited by indigenous communities such as the Taínos for more than 4,000 years ago. The most recent history put us in a colonial state under Spain and the United States for longer than 5 centuries. And these relationships are complex and continue to inspire political movement and graphics. Atleta, Puerto Rico es tuyo is a cartel that speaks to the Puerto Ricans' pride of competing for their flag. Sports is one of these instances, if not probably the only, where Puerto Ricans can exercise their sovereignty. This cartel by Manuel Garcia Fontebo, a former teacher of mine at the University of Puerto Rico, speaks to the ongoing conflicts that exist between college students and the government. In the context of the 70s, professors and students protested the presence of the ROTC, or the Reserve Officers Training Corps, in the university. The protests led to a riot that resulted in 3 people dead, 60 people injured, and about 65 or so arrested. And this is one of those cartels that you don't need to explain it. It's right there. It's the police on top of the university. UPR stands for University of Puerto Rico. So it's just right in there. You know what you're about to do if you cross that line. This other cartel, also by Garcia Fontenoa, denounces the rise of unemployment as well as the surge in electricity and consumer goods such as water, transportation, and milk in the 70s. But this time it signs people to protest, right? And to say fuego, and it's so interesting because that's with a cocktail shaker. So it kind of has like a different interesting I don't know, committee or, comical way of putting it in there. In the cartel vote, Martorell viewed people's vote on the 1968 Puerto Rican elections as a waste of time and resources. Republican candidate pro-statehood Luisa Ferrer was elected that year. In this poster, he illustrates the American-made toilet and writes "vote," a word readable in both English and Spanish, using a circus kind of looking type lettering while flushing the T, meaning that voting within this context is a wasteful resource. This is a very humorous approach to such a complex issue. Looking back at this poster, one can also think of the limitations that American citizens of Puerto Rico have when exercising the right to vote in American elections today. Puerto Ricans in the island still cannot vote for presidential elections and have no representation in the United States Congress. In this last section, I want to talk about the most recent events in contemporary state of Puerto Rico and how national disasters and COVID really have deeply affected local communities on the island. To start, the birth of the Black and white Puerto Rican flag has had an important impact to the latest protests in the island. In 2016, President Barack Obama signed into law the Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act, or PROMESA, which imposed a 7-member fiscal control board responsible for managing the island's billionaire debt. The board, comprised of people who are neither elected nor living in the island, was given supremacy over Puerto Rico's laws and decision-making. This fact was seen by many people as the ultimate act of colonialism in the modern era. And this site in Old San Juan, an old town in Puerto Rico, used to have a colorful flag that was painted black, but what was painted black and white by an anonymous group of activists as a sign of protest. And since then, the black and white flag has been used in further protests. And it continues now to has become a symbol, a graphic symbol in the country. After a series of leaks from the former governor Ricardo Rosselló, hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans blocked a major highway and launched an island-wide strike in the summer of 2019 to demand their governor's resignation and succeeded. You got Bad Bunny, you got everyone there, everyone was, got together. People were coming, this was a convocatory and people went to this main expressway in San Juan and people were going through jet skis, horses, motorcycles, bicycles. It was just like a mass kind of movement going in there to protest. This cartel by Gavin Sierra invites people to join one of the biggest protests in the history of the island. And this cartel also by Gavin Sierra celebrates Cacerola Girl, and a woman who brought her pot and cookware and protested during the strike and ended up going really viral. So the cacerolas have been historically a symbol of protest in Latin America, and you just bring a pot and a spoon and you take it and you go to town with that. And another note, a constant problem the Puerto Ricans have encountered since they were hit by Hurricane Maria in 2017 has to do with electricity. Since then, the already fragile power grid was devastated. After almost 5 years, it hasn't been fixed. Since 2021, the Canadian-American company Luma Energy was appointed to control the island's energy transmission and distribution, but Puerto Ricans have repeatedly taken to the streets to protest the companies as frequent blackouts and high energy costs becomes more burdensome. And to wrap up, I want to share this poster that I designed after President Trump considered the idea of selling Puerto Rico after the island was devastated by Hurricane Maria in 2017. Nowadays, crypto investors are relocating to Puerto Rico for savings on individuals and corporate taxes. The colonial practices of the United States government are still jeopardizing the future of the Puerto Rican folks, making it harder for the young ones to foresee a future in the island and for the elderly to remain in it. And with that, I want to thank Silas Munro, Polimo Saer, and the Letter from Archive for giving me the opportunity to share my research in this critical space. I also want to thank the general staff of the Museum of History and Anthropology of Art, the University of Puerto Rico that facilitated this research, to the Puerto Rican designers Manuel Fonteboa for sharing this experience with me, artist Gavin Sierra for generously sharing his work during this presentation, and also want to thank Northeastern University for supporting my research. And lastly, to my partner, Tatiana Gomez, for sharing the love for this research and contributing to La Gráfica Latina. So que viva La Gráfica Latina. You can find this work and a little bit more in graficalatina.com, or you can find us through Gráfica Latina in Instagram. Thank you, guys.
Wow, thank you, Jose. My eyes are popping, my brain is exploding. and then all the synchronicities between both of your conversations. I have so many questions, and I imagine you have questions for each other, but I wanted to go to one question in the Q&A, and there's also one question in the chat for each of you. So I'm going to start with a question for Anna that comes from Bree, and I'll just read it. Thank you for the discussion, Anna. Speaking to call and response, were there echoes of communication between Cuban protesters in the States and other islands during the 80s and beyond? Did other islands like Jamaica, for example, and countries in the Caribbean combine rhetoric and messages promoting these messages? Are there traces of visual language between the islands during this time, maybe a connection of them you're aware of and trying to amplify each other's voices? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bree, for your message. There's a lot of questions in that. I mean, for your question, there's a lot of questions in the questions. So let me have it open. Let me look at it. Communication between Cuban protesters in the States and other islands during the 80s and beyond. I mean, I think so, possibly. I know that there was during Cuban kind of the time where a lot of Cuban posters and Cuban graphics were being created. There was organizations, for example, OSPAL, and OSPAL was working with other countries, not just in the Caribbean, but Africa, Europe, and further beyond, in connecting with each other and promoting each other's messages, in creating graphic material, for the most part posters, that spoke of many of the different issues that many countries around the world were facing. There was a magazine that was published in Cuba called Tricontinental, and Tricontinental would have posters inside that were slide inside of the magazine, that where these posters that I'm discussing or talking about, the OSPAL posters, they were small. They weren't like 24 by 36 or anything. They were more smaller posters that could be folded into the magazine. And let's see, the other islands like Jamaica, for example, and countries in the Caribbean combine rhetoric and messages promoting these messages. I mean, Jose, I don't know if I'm not very familiar with the Caribbean countries and Jamaica in sense of the protest language or things like that, but I would imagine that there were connections for sure. However, I mean, if we're talking about from Cuba to the outside, I would say no. I mean, they're isolated. They were isolated. You know, there wasn't much connection or communication happening from the island to the outside. But I would say that emigres that moved to all places in the world were speaking out against the repression that was happening in Cuba. And then other traces of visual language between the islands during this time, maybe a connection of them aware of and trying to amplify. I mean, I think so. Like we just saw on Jose's presentation, there's definitely connections. I think that the visual language, whether is via the actual visual language of the methods of production or the limited methods of production that they encounter, I do believe that there's a lot of overlap and symbiotic relationships. I hope that answers your question, Bree, in some way.
I love that answer. I dropped into the chat OSPAL as well, and Stu linked an OSPAL poster that's in the Strike Through exhibition. It's interesting because also mentioned in the chat was Emory Douglas, and I know that there was influence and connection and kind of like solidarity between OSPAL and Emory Douglas. And so that's kind of one way, Bree's question of like the Cuba States relationship. I think all those other questions are also amazing too, because like Bree, that's space for future research too. And I love that kind of like, we don't like, I feel like even after Strike Through, there's so much I still have to learn about protests and protest graphics. And I feel like what the two of you are bringing today is very much expanding on the things that we explored. So Bree, like, go for it, like research, look into the questions that you're asking. But I don't know if Jose, if you want to also chime in.
Yeah, that was a great question, Bree. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's specifically, I think between Puerto Rico and Cuba, there's always been this very complex relationship, but within the artists, they they have planned revolts together and protests together. In the Dominican Republic, these have been, these three islands has always been in accordance, or they have been planning together these events. And you can see a lot of Puerto Rican cartele designers will come and artists will go to Cuba and vice versa, right? So they will exchange those ideas. So that definitely does exist. And there was a lot of that. I think in terms of the OSPAL, yeah, the OSPAL just like exported communism and exported a graphic language to all the countries that needed it. So, they were having similar movements or civil kind of unrest in their own country. So Asia, you were talking, like Emory Douglas, yes, the Black Panther Party in the United States, but you have the Puerto Rico independence in Puerto Rico, then you have the upsettling in Chile, then you have the issues in Guatemala, then you have the stuff happening in Uruguay, right? So you have and Honduras, and so you have all these upheavals happening also in Vietnam and in Africa, right? Where people Senegal, and you have all this kind of, so there were all this this was an interesting time with the OSPAL in that time, where all these uprisings were happening. And the Cubans did an amazing thing, which was export that visual language to these countries. And imagine that they don't speak the language, right? And so they have to figure out a way to communicate this language through very hard, very simple symbolism and iconic things: the gun, the rose, the spines, the military hat, the arrows, right? Some people did not fight with guns in this country. So it was really trying to kind of depict and communicate those really, really important and necessary issues that in their country. And I think that's it for me. And so the Cubans really did a lot of that. I think the Puerto Ricans did something different. They were in New York. The migration led them to go, to travel easily. That was a different thing that was not happening in other Latin American countries, because we were a territory, so we had the citizenship. So Puerto Ricans can travel. So a lot of resistance happened in New York. There was a Young Lords Party doing stuff there. There was a lot of the Puerto Rican nationalists and Puerto Rican designers or artists that were developing these carteles often went to New York and also did some work there. So there was a lot of conversation between New York and Puerto Rico at that time as well, and continues today. It was kind of like the diaspora has always been a very important element, and that's it.
Thank you so much. That was really, I love the interaction of what's happening between the two of you. I think there was a question from Carolina, although she's going to drop off, but she was asking, I would like to know the actual effect of these brilliant posters in the way that people live and see themselves. I think this is something so powerful that is lacking in Canada, where Carolina is from. These are passionate or living. These are passionate, informed, engaged, and engaging. So I think that was when Jose was presenting, but I feel like that also applies to Anna and the works that you were showing. If there's a way you could sort of extrapolate, there was a lot of political history and context that you both were sharing, both historically and contemporary, that sort of these posters and dialogue. But if you wanted to extrapolate on the impact or effect of these posters.
You want to go, Anna, or?
Sure. I mean, I think absolutely. There is such a rich history of poster design, poster making in Cuba, continues today to this day. I mean, the situation in Cuba right now is pretty bad. It's pretty dire. So I'm not really sure how much of artistic production is happening at this point, but that is their lifeline to make art, to be artists, to be designers, to make work is their lifeline. And there's such a huge history and connection between the past and the present, contemporary time of designers and artists making work and connecting with this work in this very passionate way, in this very personal way. That absolutely, I think that they see themselves in their work. It's an outlet for them. It's a way for them to express themselves. And you know, I've visited Cuba several times, and one of the things that I used to notice a lot in the art, in the fine arts, in the design, and everywhere, how embedded in the artist's works, you would see commentary, you would see protest, you would see how they were responding to the repression, to the oppression, hidden messages, like you know, and I would always think, how can they get away with this? This is amazing. And I think it's because there was not a close observation from those in power. And I feel that social media has made that change drastically, especially, you know, when the internet got better in Cuba, and artists and designers and intellectuals and writers and filmmakers had better access to the internet, and they were able to communicate through social media more freely. That's when I feel the government was like, oh, wait a minute, what is going on here? And then they started to really pay attention, create all the decrees, create all the censorship, which then they start to look more closely at what people were making, at the things that they were identifying with, and being able to create commentary through their work, sort of like hidden messages. So it's very complex, but yes, absolutely. There's a huge history and connection of artists throughout history in Cuba that is their form of expression. That's why what's going on in them right now in this moment is very dangerous.
Yeah, the carteling within the Puerto Rican context, the cartel kind of comes in as a practice that comes almost it existed there before, but really comes in when the kind of as a WPA project that brought some Irene Delano, it brought wonderful people that started to kind of start working with the cultural government to spread and to help communicate issues of you know, education and health and that. But with that event, but within that kind of like starting up or that kind of first interaction or first intervention in the cartel, studios formed, or graphic workshops started to form by different artists. And this kind of studios were really just reacting to what was happening in the community. Now, not all of it was protest, a very direct protest, right? And even I would think that there was not a lot of direct protest, because that was not, you know, the cartelistas in Puerto Rico kind of looked at symbols that were national symbols, right? To kind of adhere to those, and instead of just using a flag or Uncle Sam or something like that, some very direct kind of things, they were kind of looking at other kind of cultural symbols from the island. But not only protest was celebrated, cultural events, you know, the festival of aguacate, or like you know, the pineapple festival, right? It was all the different. It was the cartel in Puerto Rico is a way to celebrate Puerto Rican culture and nationalism. Because of that, it kind of sit in through it, right? It kind of found its way into this protest as well. So what I mean by that, there's a cartel in a lot of homes in Puerto Rico, right? So it's kind of a thing, el afiche is that kind of thing that you have, right? Like families have them, and that's okay. And some of them are, you know, the coffee celebration, or the other one is like abajo el imperio, you know. So they're just this kind of different kind of messaging through that. But the poster or the cartel, this protest cartel really happened. Economy, it means very much similar like Cuba, but there was a big difference. We had a democracy, right? So in a way, there were issues with that. And yes, there were some persecutions. And then there was those things, but there was kind of a different way of dissemination through these carteles than you know, that happened in Cuba, for example, GLU. This happened also to some people, but it wasn't, you know, there was some sort of democracy at the time, right? So we had that, but these posters were really meant to live outside in the streets. So if you get some right now, they're hardly to find because not a lot of editions were made, and they, you know, they were just made out as a way to respond to what was happening, the students' revolts, and any kind of things, any kind of issues that had to do or strikes that were happening at that moment.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, in Cuba, it was the same. The posters or similar in the sense of
Yeah.
posters that were cultural posters to promote movies, then
Yeah.
posters, political posters, OSPAL and all of that. So yeah, it was very similar as well.
So the cartel, in a way, in Cuba, and at least in Cuba and Puerto Rico, which are, you know, it was something that was very highly, you know, celebrated within the art.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was the main form of expression, right?
Yeah.
However, there's other things too. In Cuba, there was so many other things, but the poster, the cartel, takes precedence. It's like the one thing that everybody knows, is the one thing that people want to collect. But Jose and I were discussing this before a couple of days ago. There is so much more that doesn't get that attention, right? That it's embedded with design, with incredible design. And, you know, that's it's difficult to do that research, which I've tried, I do, but it's difficult. It's hard to find, it's hard to see it because the focus has been on the cartel forever and ever, right?
So if you find them, that's awesome. But then finding the other ones so it's an interesting way. I agree.
Yeah.
Like, all this, you know, ephemeral, because all of this stuff was, you know, it was ephemeral. It's not meant to stay, right? So the ones that stay, you know, you can find them here and there. Some people might collect them. I think a lot of the work of trying to research this work, it's also, as happens in other kinds of research as well. But at least I found myself always tracking, finding, looking, contacting, calling one, and then that's it. That person giving another number, and then all of a sudden I have to take a trip to Puerto Rico and just meet. And so it's just this kind of moments in which it's really exciting to find this kind of work, because it doesn't exist. It wasn't meant to be, and it was really never put into also a you know, a pedestal, right, of design in a way. So, you know, the people that come in, I mean, I went to school, and you know, the first thing is I want to be like that, you know, I want to draw, because that's how I felt. That was the kind of the identity of graphic design to me, was those carteles, right? Because I couldn't see, that was what I saw, right? But it's just really interesting that when you come to these areas where you find this awesome stuff, you realize, well, wait, so Ladislav Sutnar did a lot of really cool things that had to do with engineering and stuff. It's like, who was doing that stuff back home? You know what I mean? Who were these people that were, you know, designing like boring catalogs? I want to know, like, what was this, you know? So it's just, it opens up a whole thing in this idea that you're talking, Anna, on this, like the you know, it's not the frame poster, like what is older than that? Like what?
For example, the first time I was in Cuba, 2007, going to the market, just like on Sundays, they have these street markets, and they have all these book vendors, individuals that have book collections at home. And in order to make some money to be able to put food on the table, they're selling their book collections. The most incredible book covers I've ever seen in my life. But nobody talks about those. We don't see those. We don't, you know, we don't have access to them because they haven't left the country. And if they have, they're in somebody else's library. You know, there's in someone's library that emigrated from Cuba. So there's so much out there. Yeah. That, you know, not enough time.
Well, let's change that, Anna.
Yes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel
Steven,
like this is inspiring, you know, like that. I would love to see more about those book covers. And
I took photos. Tons of photos. Yeah, I have to dig them out. Yeah.
You
And-
are
and
basically piquing our interest at the archive of how we can help, because that's the major part of what we need to be doing, is expanding what is held in collections like ours, which we try to make as accessible as we can.
Yeah.
And that kind of led me to it just leads me to a question I had for both of you. Jose, you were talking a little bit about the accessibility of things, but that some people have, you know, posters in their homes and things like that. But I'm curious, on both islands, how familiar are people with this history? Have they seen the things that you showed today, or are they famous in any way, or are most of these things still kind of unknown to most of the population?
In my case, no, it's very celebrated, especially more now than ever, due to the recent protests that have happened. And my Torel just received a medal of the arts by Biden. So there was there's definitely it's a very important part of Puerto Rican identity, the graphic cartel, I think. And there's been some writing about that. There's some really beautiful literature about that. So it's there. I think it's I think my hope and what I'm trying to do here is bring it up here, right? Like and along with other people, and kind of and think about this as a way to communicate and disseminate it through the diaspora, right? Through the newcomers, through the Puerto Ricans that live here, and kind of contextualize back into that from a more like a graphic design perspective as well, a different kind of critical perspective of what's going on there. But yeah, I think there's some are still alive, some have passed. So so it's still a very vibrant moment. I think the University of Puerto Rico just did a great show about that, about the carteles. And so I collect them. I try to get them when I can, and so it's a very exciting moment to see that stuff, because I've been looking into this for like 10 years now. So to see that this is happening is so exciting for me, and and to be able to present that here too.
Yeah, I mean, Cuba, the same as the carteles and graphics art are very celebrated, appreciated. However, it's very different. It's, I mean, maybe not so different, but it's about who you know, about what connections did you have, what did you do. So, for example, one of the greatest designers of the revolution, Olivio Martinez, who I spoke about, and we show some of his work on the BIPOC design history lecture that I did with Elaine Lopez. He passed away, and there's no news about that. And he was one of the, he made the Zafra carteles, or the Zafra billboards, the sugarcane campaign, with the one with the numbers from 1 to 10. It's in the lecture that I did. And there's nothing out there. There's no news about his passing. And in my opinion, he was one of the greatest of the Cuban revolutionaries, the Cuban designers of the revolution. So it is celebrated, but it's very conditional. It's very influenced by politics in some way, right? If you're not in with the Minister of Culture, or you could be in with the Minister of Culture, but they don't like you for whatever reason, or they don't want to support you for whatever reason, then you don't get the support. It's very complicated. It's such a complex issue. I mean, and contemporary designers today are very celebrated. Lots of them are very celebrated, but same thing. It depends. It really depends. It's unequal. It's uneven. Don't you agree, Jose? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think
it's very strange in Cuba in that way.
And I think in Cuba it is. In Puerto Rico seems also, the cartelistas at that time, and they had a nationalist idea. So obviously, the Puerto Rico has a Republican government, so it's
Right.
there's always been that. It's a small place. There's always been those kind of things. Today, I can say that, like you said, like the newcomers, like the new, there's
Right.
artists like Arvin Sierra, for example, he's been, promoted, and, he's doing great work. And I see some small, like new talleres coming in. So
Yeah.
of youngsters, like taking in screen printing
Yeah,
and coming in. So that is
Mhm.
very much alive right now. And I think that
Yeah.
has to do a little bit with the recent the recent situations that the
Mhm.
country
And
has
so,
looked like.
and
Mhm.
social media has really helped us.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, even though we might look down on Facebook, some of us, or whatever, in America now, it's something else, it's TikTok or whatever, but Facebook is, it's a big forum, it's a big place for communication, social media in general.
Yeah.
For them to promote themselves, for young designers and artists to put themselves out in the world. So yeah, absolutely. I think the new generation is doing it a bit different. Yeah.
I feel like this related to a lot of conversations we were having when we were curating Strike Through about sort of what's known and what gets respected, both from like
Yeah.
a canonical graphic design point of view, but also
Yeah.
like wider culture. And I feel like we were very intentional about trying to intersperse sort of like people that are more known or sort of greatest hits
Yeah.
of design with those who are equally talented and amazing or equally impactful or connected to their communities, but not necessarily in the archives of graphic design history. And
Yeah.
I feel like both of you are speaking to that complexity and the way in which both governmental structures, but also social structures kind of like negotiate what posters or what carteles are considered
Yeah.
important or
Yeah.
what
Absolutely.
are significant. And I think it's also interesting to think of the carteles as like a site of something that's kind of populist, you know, like it's has a kind of a different, it's more in the public realm, and it's also people are you know, carrying it in their hands, but also like saving them and collecting them. And I think that's like a really interesting complexity and something to sort of like, you know, navigate as we sort of think about like evolving design histories and what's considered important or high or what gets seen as important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think like as long as there's struggles in societies and communities, there will be carteles, you know, like, and they will continue to happen. And I think that in the situation of Puerto Rico, for example, you know, the same situations are happening today. We can talk about that, and same in perhaps in the United States in some features. So we still have to deal with the colonial powers. We have to still deal with issues of environmental degradation. We have to deal with the occupation of militaries and site cleanup. We have to look at you know, foreigners coming in and investing and taking the right for people to own their land and all this kind of. So all these issues are continue to happen. So I think the cartel is just that. The cartel is just nothing but an amplification of that voice, you know, and it's kind of like, it's really just putting out, typographically or formally what the struggles are happening in that place. So, you know, it's kind of, it's exponential to me, you know, it's its own thing. So I think collecting it is really important. At least in my case, also as a patrimony for my own, you know, for my own upbringing, and present that to other communities that haven't been exposed to that, because we sometimes are told that like we said, like our design and our, you know, that our, you know, our aesthetics or our work is not perhaps as important than others. So I think to me, it's like a way of bringing this to communities, so for them to see themselves in the mirror and say, hey, yeah, we're badasses too.
But,
you know?
but I also want to bring up something that it's very much, I mean, it's very much linked to Cuba, is there is, it's difficult and it's very unfortunate. If you toe the party line or not, it's a huge thing there, right? If you toe the party line, you'll get the commissions, you'll be able to work for the Minister of Culture, you'll be able to work for all the well-known organizations, you'll be hired by the government, you'll right? So on and on and on. But if you don't toe the party line, what happens is what happens to some of the individuals that I talked about today. Hamlet Labastida he was released from prison, and he now, I believe he's in Europe and Germany, and he can never go back to Cuba. That was the condition for his release. And then there's individuals that they want to be able to live, they love their country, they want to be able to stay, so they have to toe the party line, they choose to toe the party line. And it's such a difficult position to be in if you want to be able to feed your family, put food on the table, and have a decent life, versus do you want to be the opposite and, you know, suffer the consequence? It's so difficult. This is such a complex issue. And I just wanted to bring that up because as someone that is constantly trying to understand and stay up to date and be able to study this subject and to understand it, I have to sort of like accept many different things that I might not be so inclined to accept otherwise, if that makes any sense.
It totally does. I feel like this nuance of process and like context,
Yeah.
both of you spoke to, and there's a question in the chat that's kind of connected to that from Danielle, and she is saying, many times in my experience being involved in protests and complementary political work, I find I'm the only designer in the room, so to speak. Are there any examples you know of that could guide designers in similar situations to help others feel empowered to create messages, protests, posters, etc., that further their cause? So sort of that question of like, how do you find your voice as a designer in a movement? I don't know if either of you could speak to that based on some of your research and your own practices.
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of times that designers often find themselves like being the only ones in a table. So I think that's definitely a situation that it's filled by all of us. I think which I believe that's very true. And I think that there are just seeds. It comes out of my mind, just people that do a lot of protest work, and they have a, you know, really big network, and people often voice, and they're really open, nonprofit, really awesome people. They're collectives too. I mean, they must be collectives. I know in Puerto Rico there's some that I'm happy to share that are doing this kind of work. I mean, I think in my experience, like I was doing some work, you know, for, you know, within the protests of 2020, and just found the opportunity to kind of do that, like, so take action into that too, and voice it yourself. I think the poster is really about voicing that stuff, and perhaps not necessarily working almost in an instructional moment. Like a protest poster almost wants to be just an urgent kind of thing, and it perhaps doesn't want to respond to any kind of like table issue. I almost want to kind of say, just do it and put it out there, and let people say whatever they want about it. So I don't know. If you plan too much a protest poster, perhaps it's not a protest poster anymore. It's sort of my take on that.
I mean, I think the gist of the question was how has this language, this protest language, moved across or outside in the diaspora of Cuba and Puerto Rico, right? I think that was it. No, I'm asking Silas, actually.
Oh, sorry, there's two different questions. So that one's in the Q&A.
Sorry.
There was one in the chat that I read. I'm sorry. From Danielle back at 103. Jose, you were speaking to that question.
Yeah. I was confused.
I was going to get to that last one in a second.
I was confused.
Yeah, sorry,
I was like, wait, where's this question?
Yes, it's in the
what is
chat.
Jose talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, Danielle is basically asking for experience or support to, like, what is it like being the only designer, you know, in a protest context, and are there examples of like how you could guide a designer to sort of navigate and help others feel empowered to create their own messages or posters?
Got it. Sorry, I was a little bit confused.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really have, Danielle, I don't really have any examples. I'll have to think of that. I don't really have any examples.
I would like to think, like, you know, find a collective. It's always good. I think when you have a protest and there's protest issues, there's more than one people that it's, so if you are in a circle where that might not be issue and voice, find that community that those things are happening. And through that community, often talleres and these workshops, they almost never happened by themselves. It was not an isolated, it was not an isolated thing. So if you find yourself that you are in a table where you're voicing some concerns and those concerns are not being met, then perhaps find a community that does, and then make the poster and then put it on their window.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
And start a conversation, I guess.
No,
That's
go for it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what, Danielle, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, create your own group, create your own opportunity to do this, right? I mean, we had a strike here at CCA last year, I believe, and I created a table for people to make their own protest posters. And basically, I just gave them a prompt that said, I strike because, and then we stenciled it on the poster, and then they design or they draw or they wrote why they were protesting. So I created an opportunity. I was like, I want people to be able to express why they're doing this. So I created an opportunity for it. So I think that if you can't find the room to do that, Danielle, make it for yourself, make it yourself.
I love that. I feel like I also want to call into Fabiana Rodriguez, who's in Strike Through. She hosted a poster making workshop in September connected to the archive, and she does that often. And I think that idea of like workshopping it, it's connected to what Anna and Jose were saying, is kind of building the community or supporting the community. And there's actually a lot of learning in that collective, you know, experience where you may be bringing specific skills as a designer, but then you're maybe not conventional designers can also bring a mode of expression. And there's so many posters in Strike Through that are folks who are not trained officially as graphic designers, but make amazing graphics. And I think it's that collective action, and it's that urgency that we've been seeing in all of this, where you kind of are in a moment and you feel called to do something. And I think it's just about creating the space like Anna, you just did at CCA, to have the materials to make together. It's kind of like the idea of a taller, you know, like making collectively together to generate a protest.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, one thing that we do in our studio, along with Tatiana, we have offsets. We had offsets, and we have letterpresses with us. So we go in and we go ahead and print and just give the posters away to people.
Nice.
And spread them out. And whether they are, you know, we started doing them through the protests after George Floyd's murder, and then we continue to do those till today. So, you know, like, I think there's as designers, it's sort of like generating content. The content is out there, is listening to your community, figuring out your audience, and kind of like go back to the studio and do something quick and urgent and print it. Whether you have a letterpress or you have an 9.5 by 11 or Riso or stamps, you know, I think that's the idea, is just to be reactive and respond to the needs of your communities.
Yeah, lots of great support.
If you want to see what I was talking about, the I strike because, there's a few of those. I'm really bad at social media, so I don't update my social media that often. But anyways, there's a few I strike because posters on my Instagram, my $1 a minute Instagram. If you want to see, I'm gonna put it on the chat.
Great, that's awesome. Bree also dropped a resource that looked really powerful in this sort of like collective knowledge building. We're almost at time, so I want to kind of close us. I know that there was that other Q&A chat. I feel like, Jose, maybe you spoke to some of this already, but the influences that you've seen, how Puerto Rican protests on the island across the diaspora, and create a larger influence on transnational Puerto Rican nationalist movement. I don't know if you want to give a quick like 30-second answer to that.
Well, I think there has been collectives that are happening right now. There's a collective that just that is about the diaspora, and it's putting together Puerto Rican printmakers from the island and from New York, and sort of starting those conversations. I think there's some of that. You know, I think the communications back and forth from the United States to Puerto Rico it's fluent in terms of that. We go back and forward a lot. So I think and I think we have a very strong diaspora that it's very concerned about what goes in the island. So I think as long as that's happening, we will be responding to that. But I think in terms of groups per se, I don't have them in my mind, but if you can email me, I will definitely talk to you about those or meet via Zoom or something. And we can talk about those. But they are some collectives in the island starting to, you know, to move across. There was just an exhibit in the Whitney about after Hurricane.
Oh, yes.
So
Yeah.
you know, that's
Yes,
what some of
yes.
the, so that's a very you know, that's a very direct, right?
Yeah.
Connection there. There are other ones. Like I
Mhm.
said, I don't want to, you know, perhaps, but it's Garvin Sierra is there, for example, and you know, it's interesting, and many other awesome artists. So there's moments like that are happening, but they're also
Mhm.
you know, not less, but you know, other methods of dissemination, not just from, you know, the museum.
However, it's unfortunate that Puerto Rico had an awful hurricane in order for it to get on exhibition at, you know, at the Whitney.
And
or
those
wherever.
are the
It's just like,
questions, right? Those
come
are kind of the
on.
questions.
We have to go through this in order to get a
Mhm,
show. Come
mhm.
on. Anyways, I had to get
just
that. I had to
dropped
get that
it.
out there.
No, please, I'm glad. I just dropped the link to that show in the chat for people who want to take a look at it, which is really powerful. And I just want to thank you, Jose, for your generosity. Anna, your generosity. This was really generative and really exciting. I'm fired up. And just thanks
Thank you so
everyone for
much.
joining and closing Strike Through with a bang.
Thank you so much, Silas and Stephen and
Sure.
Jose. It was fantastic.
Thank you, guys. Always
And sir, thank you,
super
sir, for running the show.
Yes,
Thank you all.
Behind the
It's been an
scenes.
opportunity. Thank you for the platform.